Welcome to the HR Huddle podcast, presented by Sapient Insights Group, the ultimate resource for all things HR. It's time to get in the huddle.
Welcome to Spilling the Tea on HR Tech, where we focus on the hottest HR tech news everyone needs to know to be in the know. We break down the news of the week and help you make sense of what it means for our industry and how it can impact your organization. We're recording today on December 7th, 2023. It's getting towards the end of the year, and I can't believe we're already here. We're bringing you all the news you can use this week. And I'm your host, Stacey Harris, Chief Research Officer and Managing Partner for Sapient Insights Group, a research and advisory firm. And joining me today is my great co-host, Cliff Stevenson, Director of Research and Principal Analyst for Sapient Insights Group. Welcome to the show, Cliff. We're wrapping up the year almost. It's hard to believe, right?
It is unbelievable. It really seemed like just yesterday we were saying, okay, the paper's coming out. It's been out for 2 months. No, that can't be right. That can't be right.
It is.
Amazing.
Yeah. So I know by the time this comes out, it'll probably be right before the holidays. And then I think we're probably going to do a really big recording, like either right before or right after the holidays for everyone. But there's still news. Things are running along quite quickly right now, right? A lot of stuff going on, even though we're getting towards the end of the year.
There is. At first, when I was looking at it, there was a couple things. And as we talked about last week, there was a few little scattered moments of interest, of tea to be shared towards the end of the year. I would say it was a little busier over this period. I think we've got some pretty interesting news. Wanted to share some big dates that just happened, but we've also got some pretty interesting news out of Canada for our HR sisters and brothers and others up there. We see your representation in our survey. We love to hear what you have to say. And we're also following the news there because in some cases, you're a little ahead, I think, on some of these uses and regulations. So we'll talk about that. And we'll also talk about some business news from WorkLeap, from Pingboard, from Namely, from ServiceNow, SuccessFactors, Workday, Sage, big names.
Yes.
There's a lot more news than I'll tell you than I expected. So should we jump into it?
Yeah, sure. Let's go ahead.
All right. Well, the first bit, as you and I were talking about in the green room beforehand, was wanting to mention the International Person with Disabilities Day. That was on the 3rd of December, so just a few days ago. And while that's of interest to just the global community as a whole, it being the International Day, I think it matters a lot to those of us who work in HR and especially in HR tech because of issues like accessibility, the work from home era that was still going on, but peaked in 2020 and 2021, really brought these things to light, different needs that different people have. Depending on who they are. And then also D&I plays a big part. The analytics, the representation, and all the different areas of that. So it's just something we wanted to mention. And it's always good thinking about, there's a lot of articles out there that were written around that time talking about different solutions, different ways of thinking about it. And I think it's important for us to remember that as well, because it's a big part of what we're seeing.
I think it's important to recognize the scale and the scope of this conversation, right? More than 1.3 billion people experience significant disability today. And I think the number is like 16% of the global population. Yeah. And if you aren't developing a work environment that is not just accessible, not just following the rules and the regulations, but is actually welcoming to those who have different abilities inside of our organizations, you're missing out on a huge population of the workforce.
Yeah. And for those in the US, that matters a lot because a lot of our benefits are tied up in health benefits. And people with disabilities are going to have sometimes more and certainly different needs from those medical benefits than others. And it's when you're looking at selecting benefit platforms, it's another thing to be aware of. And also, again, that how are these things being communicated? Is your technology working with them and not against them and their sort of specific needs? So I think it's important. But you did mention not just following the regulations, and I think that's really important. Yeah. However, there are some regulations that do a pretty good job, I think, of addressing kind of newer things that are coming up. And one of those that we've talked about extensively throughout 2023 is AI. And in Ontario, see, I promised our Canadian friends that we would have some news from them. Bill 149 is working its way through the legislation in Ontario. It's an amendment to the Working for Workers Act that I believe started in 2000, I think, possibly the Employment Standards Act. What was interesting, a few provisions. One, that any job posting, any publicly advertised job posting has to show you the expected compensation. I would love to see something like that happen in America. It could be a bit of an uphill battle. But one thing I do think we'll see, and I think they're sort of leading here, is that, and I'm reading from the actual bill, you must disclose whether the employer uses artificial intelligence to screen, assess, or select applicants for the position. That is something we have seen come up again and again in our own court systems in the US, that when AI has run into problems or when there's proposed legislation, it often has to do with this idea of transparency, right? You have to let people know how AI is being used, especially in something as critical as job selection.
Yeah, and we should note here in the States, there are still a lot of states themselves. It isn't across the place, but a lot of states are requiring now pay transparency. I think Colorado was one of the first, but we're definitely seeing it. I know our federal government is requiring it now, that the salary ranges are posted for those jobs, those roles within the government that they can have some impact over. And so we're seeing this really play out all across this region. We're also seeing it in the European market as well. I think pay transparencies is just going to be an expectation. The other thing we're seeing across the pay transparency conversation is the pay equity conversation. So people are actually doing the analysis now on pay equity with the pay transparency conversation. That's a big conversation that was happening in Europe when I was over there. So this is not, I think, a new thing. I think the interesting thing is that they're tying this to the in that bill, that they're tying together the AI conversation, the pay transparency, some other things all kind of under one umbrella, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, it is. I didn't think about it that way in terms of compensation transparency along with AI transparency, but that is sort of the common thread. And actually, that might have been a better segue from the previous segment, because that is another area to be, when you're thinking of, is for those people that have disabilities, how are they being affected pay-wise? Are you seeing pay discrepancies there, right? And would the fact that it all become transparent lay bare to any inequalities or inequities in your workplace is definitely a good place to work. And of course, you won't know that unless you have the right analytics about it. So I feel like it always comes back to data.
Always comes back to data. If we're doing our data right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, there's a good point. So, but on this AI thread, two different ones that I found interesting. And I should mention that when I say these companies are huge companies, but this is just the Canadian arms of them. Walmart has launched an AI tool for home-based workers. So I think we talk a lot about on this podcast and in our webinars too, that we really are cautious about the use because of the potential for losing confidential information from your organization, sensitive information, protected data. But that doesn't mean that there aren't some great use cases for AI. So Walmart Canada has released something called My Assistant. Remember that name. It's going to come up in my very next story. And it's an AI-powered tool that helps workers sort of develop their own process efficiencies, right? It's helping them think of ways to do quick, daily, tedious tasks, which could be summarizing documents, summarizing meeting notes, and finding other ways to do that. So I really like that idea of putting it as a self-service tool to work along with the HR platforms. I think that is a fairly low-risk use of AI. And the reason I mention the name is because I want to tie these two stories together before we get into the commentary, is that McDonald's, I believe also the Canada version, but this might be a little broader, has partnered with Google to do an AI chatbot that would help restaurant workers. Now, this is a little different because this is more a Q&A in the sort of learning and development space. How do you do your daily tasks? What are answers to employee manual questions? How are certain things made? that sort of thing. Now that is called Ask Pickles. I'm not making this up.
I'm sorry. I can't even.
I know.
Really Ask Pickles.
Ask Pickles is the name of the chatbot. I know. What's wrong with, what was the other one? I said, remember the name, and then I forgot it.
Yeah.
My Assistant. That's fine.
Yeah.
We don't need anthropomorphic vinegared cucumbers giving us, taking over the world, but here we are. So again, I think this is just, I want to take sort of the positive side of AI. I feel like I've been a little doom and gloom sometimes. But I think these are good uses of how we can use these new and emerging technologies and new use cases. And I think in the best possible way, which is freeing up your hours during the day, right? We always talk about this. We say, oh, this technology will allow you to focus on more strategic tasks. And it's like, yeah, but not if the use of that technology takes up as many hours as the task it was freeing up, right? I think this is just a good example of how those things can work. Now, on to the news, the sort of breaking news. WorkLeap, the employee experience company, has acquired Pingboard, which does a lot of org charts, organizational charts, and employee directories. So again, helping companies sort of understand the entire view of their workplace, get a good view of the entire employee journey throughout the company, really getting this idea of your entire day of work being in a seamless technology environment, something that we started, I wouldn't say we started seeing, but we certainly saw a real uptick in organizations that are trying to find those moments of daily contact as the optimum place to bring HR capabilities in. And I think that's why we're seeing acquisitions like this idea to unify these suites of not just traditional HR things, but also productivity apps and these sort of more administrative, more executive level, or at least high level structural and communications type tools. So pretty interesting things to see there. Org charts, especially, I feel like we don't talk about them as much, but they're still incredibly valuable, especially for those visual learners to really understand how information and authority and responsibility all interact within an organization.
What's interesting, we did a survey a few years back with employees about what they wanted from their HR systems. And the number one thing they said was org charts, right? They wanted, and I think the other one was seating charts at that point in time. My bet would be it'd probably be like a Teams or LinkedIn or like either home or not home kind of a thing, right? Now. I do think that these kind of things that seem like they're sort of more simpler versions of what work needs is a big important part of the conversation. And I actually think this is an interesting, I think WorkLeap and Pingboard, that kind of combination of what you would call more sort of, again, that service delivery conversation, right? It is about sort of how people view HR as not just performance management or learning or HR service or HR sort of employee self-service, but sort of the combination of all these things in between too. When I have a challenge, when I got to get something done, I need to find the people, I need to find the resources, I need to find the tools. That's a big part of, I think, HR service delivery strategy that is focused more on what the employees need and not just on what HR needs, which is part of this conversation, right?
Yeah, see it. Another one that's interesting because you were talking about what people like to see, namely, what we've mentioned before, and you may know, I mean, you, the listener, I know you, Stacey, know. They made an announcement that they are going to have 24 hours, 7 days a week, customer support with real people that will involve services such as employee maintenance, all your record keeping, payroll processing, reporting, all hours of the day, every day of the week, actual person, you get on the phone. That's something people like.
Yeah, it's kind of an odd announcement, right? To be like, not an AI bot, but they're pointing out that they're doing a human version of this, right?
Mm-hmm. It does seem funny, especially as we just talked about all these great things that AI can do in your self-service, but they can't do everything, right? We still need real people, and we still desire sometimes real people, even for tasks that AI could do.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's nuance.
And it's probably worth noting for the audience if they don't know. So Namely was acquired by, Namely's been around since about 2012. So you might know them from the brand perspective. But just recently in the last year and a half here, they were acquired by a PE firm, private equity firm. And that part of that process with they're going to connect them up with other applications and other tools. And I think we're now seeing part of sort of the investment that's being made by that. And that private equity holding firm also has a company called Prism HR. I think that's part of this connection.
Mm-hmm.
And so you are starting to see some of that's kind of coming to fruition. My bet is we're going to have a big announcement probably next year about them sort of coming out with all the attachments of all the tools together. And this is part of that conversation, right?
Yeah. And speaking of those connections and partnerships and acquisitions, now this is just a strategic collaboration agreement. This is service working with AWS, Amazon Web Services. And this is something you had seen recently, Stacey pointed out to me. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I think it's whenever you get an announcement from the vendors, right? We get a lot of them in kind of daily basis. To some extent, my inbox is just inundated sometime with, hear me, we're seeing this, doing that. We do try and filter for the ones I think that are most important. And the ServiceNow announcement I thought was really important because part of what they're basically stating here is that they're going to be moving their sort of cloud solution onto an AWS environment. And one of the things that we're hearing about a lot of vendors still have their own server farms, right? They're sort of running their own versions of these applications. So it's cloud-based, but still in their server farms that they're managing and they're handling. But to take advantage of what's really happening in artificial intelligence, you really need to probably leverage one of the bigger hyperscalers, right? One of these bigger companies that are like AWS or Azure, or maybe even to some extent, we're seeing what's going on with Oracle, that they're trying to sort of basically stake a claim here because of the amount of energy, the amount of system requirements, the amount of just literal sort of size of everything that comes out with artificial intelligence. And so my sense or belief is that, sort of we're seeing ServiceNow get ready for all of this, right? They've already been doing artificial intelligence in some of their areas, but my expectation is that by offering this, they're going to have that capability that's going to be a little bit more broad. The other thing I think that this will allow them to do is it's also going to give them more capability from an international perspective. I mean, they've definitely been working with multinational organizations, but you do have to have the ability to sort of figure out where your data is going to be at, and particularly by region and by country. And this might give them some of that flexibility as well. So it's interesting to see what happens here.
Yeah, absolutely. They're a big player. And speaking of that, Success Factors and Workday, both, as you mentioned, we try and really see what's happening with the major players in the game. You had some news that you had, intrepid sort of reporter beat, had gotten some information from recently as well.
Yeah, both of SuccessFactors, Workday, as well as Sage had done sort of what we call third quarter or fourth quarter, depending on what their fiscal years are, sort of updates. And you do tend to get these at the end of the year, right? So first, just SuccessFactors. I'll be honest, I haven't had a chance to actually sit in on their update. So I'll probably have more in our next conversation on this. But what was impressive is they'd sort of sent a little note to my home, which first of all, it was as a paper note, which I don't always read those. So it was a moment to say, I got something that I should be paying attention to in the
Real
paper
people.
Mail. But they had announced in this that they had more than 6,000 organizations who are now that have selected. Now the word is selected, not on, right? But have selected SAP SuccessFactors Employee Central. That number is slightly larger than I thought they had. And so I think that was a big thing to just highlight for them, that they'd hit that 6,000 number mark. The other one, which I think is probably a bigger conversation, is whether or not SAP payroll is expanding as quickly as the market says. And what they're saying, at least in the material that we received, is that SAP SuccessFactors Employee Central payroll is now supporting 50 locales. Now, it doesn't say which those are and what that looks like, and if that's where that's located in what regions. So I'll have an update for you on that when we get a chance to actually sit through their session and learn a little bit more. But I know it's almost the battle of the payroll regions that we're starting to get into again. So I've got fixed 50, I've got 20, I've got 13, right? Every big payroll provider is trying to say how many regions, countries they're covering. And so we're definitely seeing that come out with the SAP SuccessFactors announcement. On the other hand, you've got Workday, who basically came out with their Q3 earnings and the highlights around that. Those were pretty positive. Revenue of $1.87 billion from an increased revenue perspective, up 16%, up 16.7% year over year. So I think we're definitely seeing that, as we had expected, although things had slowed down in general across the board in sort of all business models slightly, our data had showed, and I think it's proving out for the year, that most of the vendors are definitely still seeing almost double-digit sort of growth percentages in a lot of areas. And I think that's coming to fruition as we're getting to the wrap up of this year. What I thought was sort of interesting is when you just compared numbers to numbers. Right now, Workday these were published publicly, and so the exact wording is important here. Workday noted that they had surpassed 5,000 core Workday human capital management customers in Q3, a little different than selected, which was the language we saw in SAP, and that they had seen considerable momentum in their financial management and Workday HCM combined acquisitions. So that kind of joint effort for them is really important. We really are starting to get into this sort of horse race model where we're saying, I've got 6,000, I've got 5,000, I've got 10,000, I've got, right. Overall, Workday's customer, we know for the HR applications generally, including their analytics platform, is in the range of 10,000 is the number they'd given us last time. And so these numbers are becoming really important to these vendors. The other announcement, I think, for Sage, now this was interesting. So Sage came up again with their 2023 release. For most of it was technology. A lot of it was focused on their financial systems and their ERP platforms. They were also announcing that they had recurring revenue that was up by 11%. So again, even in the European market, where Sage does predominantly, we're seeing those numbers kind of hold true from what we were saying, that people were going to see increased investments in HR technology as well as finance systems. What we definitely saw is that Sage was focused pretty much more on some more of the practical application side of things. So they announced that Sage people had simplified their absence request with Microsoft Teams. I know that doesn't sound like a big deal, but as we know in our data, absence and leave management is a big part of how an organization views their HR function and a big part of that strategic alignment that we talked about. And so we definitely see that. And they definitely had noted that they had reached and expand on their web features and their user interface. They're calling it Sage 200s. And so I think that they're definitely expanding what they're doing from a user interface perspective. And then they went forward with the fact that they were sort of moving. I think no one else that I had seen had sort of mentioned some of this. I'm sure it's in all of their conversations with their boards and everything, but Sage was very particularly announced that they are doing Sage Earth, which is basically focused on a carbon planner tool component of what they're offering. That was an interesting one because of the ESG play. So a lot of different announcements, Cliff. I mean, none of them that were sort of earth shattering is probably a better way to put it. But I think what we're seeing is that the market was solid this year. And these are just three examples of what we're seeing across the board, right?
No, that's a good sort of teaser for what we're going to be talking about when we do sort of a year-end wrap-up. I know we've been working together on some numbers on sort of what to expect from 2024 based on the data that we collected and also the data we're going to collect. I feel like it can't be too early to remind people that we are going to start. We've already begun planning for the next version of our survey. That's the data that Stacey was talking about when she said what we've seen from customers, that they really like seeing these sort of things. That all comes from our system survey. So keep an eye out. Still a few months off, but no reason not to start planning ahead. Speaking of too, I know that normally we're out and about and we're doing different speaking engagements or we're at different conferences. That's not the case, but we have been, because of the time of year. But we have been doing some webinars. I did one that should be publicly available soon on IREM. We just did it live on the use of AHR in the workplace. So you can go check that out. I think simply by typing in AI or just looking at the most recent webinars. Stacey, you did one too. Is that publicly available? Is that something?
Yeah, I believe that's going to be publicly available on both the Checker and iCIMS sites. So we did a webinar just yesterday with the panel, Checker and iCIMS, great panel members who were really talking about what was going on in the labor market. iCIMS economist was there, Rhea. She did a great job sort of talking about sort of where all the data was coming from and what we were seeing in the labor market. And we also had Hyla, who was talking about on the Checker side, what it was like to be a practitioner during this day of sort of tight labor markets. So yeah, it was much more focused on the talent acquisition space, but a lot of new data that we hadn't shared elsewhere. So that you can't even get in some of our other data sources because it was data that we specifically pulled just for that webinar. So it was a really good opportunity to sort of see some of the newer data coming out of the report this year on the talent acquisition side.
That's very cool. I think, that wraps up, what we had. And as you said, we've got some more already. So tea already brewing, starting early.
So do we have a date we want to give out for everyone, Cliff, where on when the survey is going to launch? Are we ready to give that yet for next year?
Oh, that is, let me do drum roll.
The public launch is the one we're going to want.
Yeah, I believe.
I put Cliff on the spot now, guys.
No,
Right.
I'm faking the drum roll while I frantically search, but I believe it's May 1st.
Yeah.
I'm okay with being a couple days off, but I know that for a fact it's May 1st.
We're going out a little bit earlier this year, guys, because we want to make sure that everybody gets a chance to participate in the survey this year. So put it on your calendar, May 1st. That's where we're going to go out. If you're interested in being a distributor, please let us know. We start that process in February, which is coming up sooner than you think. So if you're an association, a vendor, a media outlet, any large consulting firm, any of those organizations who have customers that you would like to have access to the research, the biggest and the easiest way to do that is to make sure that they participate. So definitely, please, if you are in that boat, contact us by February. And if you are looking to acquire the paper this year, the best way is to go to our website and download it. There is a fee, but I promise you the 200 pages and 150 figures, if you're looking to acquire a technology or if you're looking to understand what's going on in the market, this is going to be one of the best reports you'll find in that particular case. A couple of other big announcements to make about what's going on next year is that we are also probably going to be announcing within the next week or two a brand new service offering. So if you're interested in this, just keep an eye out on our newsletter area for the new HR system strategy workshop that we're going to be offering with a cohort model. That's something that we just talked about recently as a team, and we're getting ready to roll that out. We're putting together all the details on that. So if you're interested in doing sort of a workshop and program model around building your HR system strategy, we're getting ready to roll that out. We also have a new program, sort of HR for HR. We have a new coaching culture program that we are really looking to ramp up in the next year. So if you are looking to find coaches and mentors who are specifically focused in the HR space and helping your leaders work through their needs around executive level conversations, executive level needs, let us know. Again, we'll have some opportunities to participate in some inaugural areas around that as well in the next couple of weeks. But if you are interested in just keeping up with everything that's going on in our world and everything that's going on in your world, please be sure to go to our website and sign up for the newsletter. All the stuff that we just talked about will be there, and as well as all the ongoing updates on research launches where we'll be speaking and our visiting and when you can participate in the annual survey, as we just talked about. Be sure to listen to our sister HR Huddle podcast, HR We Have a Problem, hosted by CEO Terry Zipper. These HR Huddle episodes, make sure you say like, and whether or not any comments you have about them, those are huge in the world of podcasting, and we really appreciate it. Please subscribe, leave ratings, reviews, all those things to stay up to date with immediate breaking HR tech news and get all the behind the scenes content and tea. You can follow us at Sapient Insights on LinkedIn or X, not Twitter now, right? And Cliff, thank you for your production and all this. I know we are always trying to bring the best content and conversation to the audience, and you do a lot of that heavy lifting. Also, thank you to our Brand Method Media Group, who helps us produce our podcast, run by their amazing founder, Kelly, and our marketing team, Lisa Renko and Summer Orlano. They make this possible, make sure that it gets out to everyone here. Thanks most importantly to you, our listeners in our community. We couldn't do this without you. If you have anything you'd like to make sure that we're covering every couple week basis, please be sure to send us an email. Or if you just have a comment about what we're doing and how we're doing it, we love to hear from you. It's one of our favorite things to be able to get feedback and make updates and changes as well. And that's it for this episode of Spilling the Tea on HR Tech. We hope it's been just the brew you needed to start the engines running this week. And we'll be back in 2 weeks with another pot of boiling hot HR tech updates and insights, and probably some holiday fun in the middle of that because we're getting towards the end of the year. So thanks everyone once again for joining us. We really appreciate it. Bye.